Hey, everybody, I hope you're doing well today. Well, let's take a look at the sources of economic growth. This is the second video in the economic development chapter. And what's kind of interesting is economists admit, right, that you have to have money. You have to grow. Like GDP needs to increase, or if it does, it will facilitate development, just as a child must get taller, grow, in order to facilitate the development of that child. So let's look at the sources of economic growth, because those are also the foundations of economic development. So what are they? There are four specific sources of economic growth. Of course, this comes from our good friend Jocelyn Blink, who's been the background provider of information for this entire video series. But there are four things: the natural factors of economic development, right? There are human capital factors, there are physical capital and technological factors, and there are institutional factors. So let's take a look at each one of them individually. All right, so natural factors. Natural factors are anything that will increase the quantity or quality of the factors of production. This, of course, goes back to our earlier studies. So what does that mean? Well, it could mean, right, that you increase the land available. And I always take this really simple thing. I live in Santiago, Chile, and it's like, okay, well, if Chile took over Argentina, then we would increase our natural factors, right, because we would have more land, which means you can grow more. But it might also mean just to improve the quality of it. And you can improve the quality of your natural factors by simply improving the fertility of the land, or using it better, or improving your agricultural methods, right? Or more efficiently using your land by building up instead of expanding out. Okay, so the effectiveness you have to have these natural factors in place in order to increase the quantity and quality of the factors of production. So that is the first item. Right? And the second item is human capital. Human capital factors means the quantity of human capital may be increased either by encouraging population growth or by increasing immigration levels. And how does that mean? Well, most developing nations are not so keen, really, on increased population, because increased population causes a whole host of other problems in a particular country. But what you can do, and what all governments do, like all good parents should do, is to work on improving the quality of your human capital. What does that mean? Well, providing and subsidizing healthcare, providing and subsidizing education, vocational training, retraining, providing sanitary conditions for your people, improving the fresh water systems, making sure there's sewer systems, improving the infrastructure, so that your human people, the people that live in your country, are healthier, more educated, more well-trained, living in sanitary conditions, and naturally they're going to be more productive, which would lead to economic growth. Okay? The third item here is physical capital and technological factors. Economic growth may be achieved by improving the quantity and or the quality of the physical capital. What does that mean? It's simple, like building things, factories, machinery, shops, offices, motor vehicles, like providing better roads, schools, hospitals, like the physical stuff, right, that a country needs in order to function. And if you go to the more developed nations on this planet, you will see that stuff taken care of. There's excellent physical capital and technological factors. If you go to a country that's not developed, I spent 4 years in Nicaragua, like, you don't see those things. There are no highways in Nicaragua. You go to the beach and you end up on a dirt road before you could get to the coast. And so they need to improve on the quantity and the quality of their physical capital. But if you take a country like Chile, then it's like super confusing, because there's parts of the physical capital of Chile, which is a pretty developed nation, which are on par with the developed nations in the world. But then you go outside of Santiago and you will see things that are similar to what you would see in a less developed country. So it's going through these growing pains, which is just like a child going through the growth and expansion and development that would happen through childhood. All right, and then the last thing here is institutional factors. Institutional factors are a prerequisite for meaningful economic growth. And what does that mean? Well, these are the things that if you live in a country that functions well, you don't think about. But if you live in a country that doesn't function well, you think about them a lot. And these things could be like a structured legal system, rule of law, an effective education system, an effective and useful banking system, political stability, good international relationships, a reasonable set of infrastructure, right? If you live in a developed nation, you don't think about these things because they're already in place, but these were built years ago, right? 150 years ago. Well, if you live in a less developed place, don't think that they can't figure it out. Just realize they're on a different time spectrum, right? So if you look at most developing nations that seem to have a difficulty in functioning, the first thing I would suggest to you is that they're a young nation. Like all African nations, with the exception of Liberia and Ethiopia, their date of independence goes back to post-World War II. Right? They're like 60, 70 years old at the oldest. Most of them got their independence in the 1960s from colonial powers. Like the United States was a disaster after 60 years. And in fact, after 80 years, they started shooting and killing and had a massive civil war that slaughtered more people in the United States than any other war, all the other wars combined. So just because developed nations nowadays are developed, it doesn't mean that they didn't go through the same process. Of course they did. And doing those things, making the institutions, legal systems especially, making contracts valid, making contracts mean something, is really important to all sorts of development. Okay, so development needs this economic growth, the sources of growth, in order for development to happen, just as a child needs to grow taller in order for all of the other development things to happen. Okay? There you go. Here's the video. I hope you found it to be helpful, and we'll talk to you in a bit.